Hi, Jennifer Stuart here, and I am so excited to have Ross Greene on with me today as part of the Peace and Joy parenting series. So, Ross has quite a long resume here. He's the originator of the innovative, evidence-based approach called Collaborative and Proactive Solutions, CPS, and we'll chat a little bit about that today. That's a mouthful. As described in his influential books, The Explosive Child, Lost at School, Lost and Found, and Raising Human Beings. So he's been busy researching and writing for a long time. He's also the developer and executive producer of the documentary film, The Kids We Lose, released in 2018. Dr. Greene was on the faculty at Harvard Medical School for over 20 years and is now founding director of the nonprofit Lives in the Balance.
Lives in the Balance.
Lives in the Balance. I was trying to figure that out. He's adjunct associate professor in the Department of Psychology at Virginia Tech and adjunct professor in the Faculty of Science at the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia. He's very
You can stop whenever you want, by the way. You don't have to read the whole thing.
I know, but it's quite impressive. All right. And so he's worked with kids in many areas with parenting as well as in facilities, so all around the world. So thank you for being here today, Ross. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I am doing well. And yes, I know that introduction was long, but I'm positive there's many other things on there that you didn't even share with me. So it's just...
for me, I've just been busy for the last 40 years. That's all.
Busy making quite the difference. So I'm really appreciative of all the research that you've done and everything that you're sharing with people out there. So, I mean, I'm a parent to 3 very different kids myself, and I've been teaching and working with kids for over 20 years. So I'm very passionate about trying to help families and parents try to figure out how to get along. And there's so much confusing information out there, I think, as a parent. So I know one of your specialty, obviously, is helping families deal with challenging behaviors. And I know one of the approaches often has been to let's force the kids into submission. You know, they must listen if we tell them what to do. But I know your approach is a lot different. So if you could kind of give us a brief overview of what's your approach to dealing with these kids who won't do exactly what we say?
Well, even in a kid who will do exactly what you say, there is a downside. But I've mostly been paying attention to the behaviorally challenging kids who are having difficulty doing what you say. And when we have a kid who's not doing what we say, a lot of adults have the tendency to add power to the mix.
Sure.
That might be in the form of consequences. That might be in the form of screaming. That could be in the form of timeout. But I find that power actually makes things worse often. It often causes conflict. And we're not looking to cause conflict in kids who can be very behaviorally challenging. We're actually looking to reduce it.
Sure.
But even in a regular old kid, there's actually something to be said for teaching the kid that his or her voice will be heard, that his or her concerns will be taken into account, and that we can come up with solutions together in a way that is collaborative instead of in a way that is about power. So I really think that even and this is what I talked about in Raising Human Beings, I think that even in kids who we would not necessarily call behaviorally challenging, who you could get to do whatever you wanted, whenever you say jump, they say how high.
Yeah.
I think we really need to think about whether we want power to be the primary currency through which we are having influence on our kids. My answer is no, especially if we can get the job done a different way.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I love that, because we want to raise children who are going to go out in the world and be amazing human beings on their own, not just because we're standing next to them saying, do what I said. Yeah. Out of fear, right?
Well, it's not always going to be somebody to tell them to do something.
Sure.
And so it is important for them to learn how to think about lots of things as early as possible, how their behavior is affecting other people, taking another person's perspective, how to resolve disagreements without conflict. These are things that we could be teaching at a very early age if we weren't so caught up in power and consequences.
Yeah, no, definitely. I really love that. I love that you're recommending people take more of a problem solving approach instead of just trying to make their behavior change. I mean, I think that that's a lot more in line in general of the way that, you know, parents love their kids because they're supporting their child. And I think ultimately, I think as a parent, it's kind of a breath of fresh air, like, oh, I don't have to force them to do everything. I can come alongside and we can work together. So, but I mean, so how, what does that look like, you know, when parents in the day to day, when they're dealing with all the meltdowns and we can't get out the door and they won't do their homework and yeah.
Well, the first thing is that behavior is just the signal. Behavior is just the fever. Behavior is just the way that a kid is communicating that they are stuck and having difficulty meeting a particular expectation. Most kids, by the way, even most behaviorally challenging kids, are actually meeting most expectations.
Sure.
It's what we do with the expectations they're having difficulty meeting that is where the rubber really hits the road. And what I've talked about in all of my work is that there's two ways to go about doing that. We've already talked about one of them that I call Plan A, and that's where adults are imposing a solution.
Right.
And the way I've been teaching people how to do things for a very long time is Plan B, and that is where caregivers and kids, this doesn't have to be parents, this could be educators, this could be, we've done this with staff in juvenile detention facilities and inpatient psychiatric facilities. This is where you're collaborating with the kid on a solution, but not focused on the kid's behavior. That's just the signal. There's really not that much difference between a kid who's communicating that he or she is having difficulty meeting expectations in ways that we would call more mild, whining, pouting, sulking, withdrawing, crying, and a kid who's communicating that he or she is having difficulty meeting expectations ways that are less mild. Hitting, kicking, screaming, swearing, throwing, destroying. Whether the kid's behavior is what I call lucky, meaning mild, or unlucky, meaning not so mild, the behavior is communicating the exact same thing. I'm stuck. Right. There are expectations I'm having difficulty meeting. So in my line of work, we call those unmet expectations unsolved problems. We also call them problems that have yet to be solved. We also call them problems that are waiting to be solved.
I love it. Solved.
Yeah. But you don't solve behavior, you solve the problems that are causing those behaviors. Now, in real life, which is what you asked, that involves, here's the other key piece. Number one, we're focused on problems, not behaviors. Number two, we're solving those problems collaboratively, not unilaterally. And number three, and this is big, we are solving those problems proactively rather than reactively. And that requires that we identify those unsolved problems ahead of time. Difficulty brushing teeth before going to bed at night. Difficulty turning off the iPad to come to dinner. Difficulty completing the double-digit division problems in math on homework. Difficulty waking up in the morning to go to school. Difficulty going to bed at night by 8:30 p.m. Those are all what we would call unsolved problems, but they're all setting in motion challenging episodes.
Sure.
Once those problems are identified, they are predictable. Once they're predictable, they can be solved proactively and collaboratively, thus the name of the model, collaborative and proactive solutions. Often parents and educators, everybody's talking about how ugly it gets in the heat of the moment. In this model, we're trying to keep people out of the heat of the moment because there's really nothing great to do in the heat of the moment. The heat of the moment is not the ideal time to do much of anything, including Plan B. You want to solve these problems collaboratively and proactively, but that requires making a list and prioritizing so you know what unsolved problems you want to work on first and what unsolved problems you're setting aside for now. The setting aside ones are what we call Plan C.
Okay.
And there, in about 10 minutes, we've just covered the entire model. The rest is all the hard parts and all the tricky parts.
So say if a parent's in the midst of it, right? So they're identifying a new issue and the child's having this meltdown. So do you just recommend that they kind of just try to take it down and shelf that and then revisit that when everybody's calm? Is that kind of the approach?
Here's the deal. Yes, you want to defuse that because there's nothing great to do in the heat of the moment. So defuse it, make sure nobody gets hurt, de-escalate it. But here's the deal. That's usually a sign that we haven't yet identified this kid's unsolved problems.
Sure.
Because once we identify this kid's unsolved problems, as I always say, there are very few surprises left. So the whole key here is for parents to make the list. What are all the expectations their kid is having difficulty reliably meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Now there are very few surprises left. Now we can start solving them proactively and collaboratively. And then any surprises that do pop up are going to be extremely rare. So the likelihood that people will still find themselves in the heat of the moment is extremely rare.
Right. Yeah. Well, because I think that those are the times when they're most likely to do punishment and rewards. And because, right, you're in the middle of whatever the restaurant or who knows what, and you're like desperate in that moment. Like, I just want to eat my meal, or I want to not
You're
torture
embarrassed.
everybody else. Yeah.
Right. But here's the deal. I promise you, this is not the first time this kid's had a hard time meeting your expectations in the restaurant, right?
Yeah.
What I want to know is, how come we haven't solved that problem yet? And how come here we are yet again, stuck in the heat of the moment, trying to deal with it when we could have dealt with it proactively weeks ago?
Yeah, no, and I love that. I think that's a great point. So then how does a parent begin to identify what in the world is causing that? Where do they start?
Well, there's an instrument on the Lives in the Balance website. That's my nonprofit, livesinthebalance.org. They can find the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems in the paperwork section. And that can help them identify not only the expectations their kid is having difficulty meeting, but also the skills the kid might be lacking that are making it hard for the kid to meet those expectations. Those are two good things to know about your kid.
Sure.
But some people do it more informally. They just keep a log for a week of every expectation their kid was having any difficulty meeting, any request their kid balked at meeting, anything their kid got upset about. After a week, you probably got 95% of the things your kid's losing his mind over every week.
Sure. Yeah, no, definitely. So, and what age do you think kids can start to really collaborate with the parent and try to figure out, all right, we're having this issue with whatever teeth brushing or bedtime or, how young?
You start collaborating with the kid and trying to figure out what's getting in the kid's way the day the kid is born.
Okay.
But if you want to have a conversation with the kid about a problem, you're probably going to have to wait until they're about 2.5.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that you can't involve kids who are younger than that in helping you understand what's the matter and in thinking of solutions that might solve that problem. My daughter, who's now 20, I'm pretty sure, 20 is bad.
Time goes by fast.
She's 20, went way too fast. This is the saddest part of my life right now. I just took my son to college last week, and I am in mourning. I am going to kid withdrawal. I don't want that chapter to end, and I'm told by older siblings that the chapter never ends, but I'm not happy that I don't have kids in my house anymore. I might have to adopt a few.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. Where were we? What was the question? I already forgot it.
We were talking about when they're younger and trying to help them collaborate. Yeah.
My daughter was very verbal very early. We were solving problems collaboratively with her before she was 2 years old.
Okay.
My son was a little slower, as boys sometimes are, on the words. I was solving problems with him this way by the time he was 2.25, 2.5. Okay. And he was tickled pink when I finally started doing it with him because he had seen me doing it with his sister and he was kind of chomping at the bit. There's always expectations that kid is having difficulty meeting, and kids are very eager to participate in the process of helping us figure out what's making it hard to meet that expectation. That's actually the first step in solving a problem collaboratively. I call it the empathy step. It's where you're gathering information from the kid so as to achieve the clearest possible understanding of what's making it hard for the kid to meet that expectation. Second step is the define adult concern step. That's where the adult is entering his or her concern into perspective. And the third step is the invitation. This is where kid and caregiver are collaborating on a solution that will address the concerns of both parties. And that's how we help parents and other caregivers learn about their kid, establish a better relationship with their kid, communicate better with their kid, dramatically reduce conflict, and dramatically reduce all those behaviors that everybody's all up in arms about.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think a lot of times one of the biggest confusions is that people feel like if they don't force their kid into submission and they somehow are allowing this collaboration, that they're giving their kids a message, right? That it's okay to behave a certain way because they're not coming down hard and saying, we're not allowed to do that, right? But so
coming down hard is not the only way to let a kid know that you disapprove of how he's behaving. But also remember that behavior is occurring in response to expectations the kid is having difficulty meeting.
Right.
Coming down hard solves none of those problems. Timeout solves none of those problems. Locking a kid in his room solves none of those problems. All stickers solve none of those problems. All those interventions do is let the kid know what behaviors you do and don't like. And here's the good news. Your kid already knows what behaviors you do and don't like. So you don't need any more stickers to accomplish the mission. You don't need to put your kid in timeout anymore. You need to get busy identifying and solving the problems that are causing those behaviors. And that's the interesting thing. Coming down hard doesn't accomplish any of those things. So I think it's interesting to think about, what are we communicating when we stop coming down hard, so to speak, and start solving problems with kids? We are communicating that we've noticed that they're having difficulty meeting certain expectations. They're not misbehaving all the time. They're only misbehaving some of the time in response to certain expectations they're having difficulty meeting. That's a good thing for a kid to know that we have come to recognize. We are communicating to the kid that we are actually curious about what's getting in his way. Curiosity is a huge part of this model. And often when adults are gathering information from the kid about what's getting in the kid's way on meeting a particular expectation, adults are absolutely blown away by what they didn't know.
I love that.
The kid is also learning that adults have important concerns too. The kid is learning how to take those concerns into account. Power accomplishes none of that stuff. And best of all, when you're solving problems collaboratively, this is something you and your kid are doing together. Power, you're flying solo. You're on your own.
Yeah, no, I love that. You're building a relationship. And I think a bonus to all that then is you're teaching the child empathy, because you're modeling that to them. So not only are you solving this problem, but you're also creating other wonderful life skills. Yeah.
If you want a kid to listen to your concerns, the best strategy is to make sure you're listening to your kids' concerns.
Yeah, no, I love that. So then how do we translate that? So then we send our kids out into the public, right? We send them off to school, or they're on a sports team with a coach or something else like that. So how are we helping prepare them, or helping their other adults in their life address them in this way?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people will say to me that it's a plan A world, and that by doing plan B, you are setting the kid up for failure. A good friend of mine named Tony Wagner, who's written some influential books about the skills kids are going to need in the society of the future, talks about some really important skills. And among the most important are collaboration and problem solving. and blind adherence to authority is not on the list. I actually find that the world doesn't demand anywhere nearly the blind adherence to authority that people think it does. But the world sure does demand a lot of problem solving, and the world sure does involve a lot of collaboration.
I love
Being in the workplace does, marriage does, even if you don't get married, dealing with anybody who's your significant other, going to require collaboration and problem solving. So I'm actually kind of hard. The world is filled with expectations. The world is not filled with plan A. Most people meet most expectations. What we ought to be doing with everybody is when they're having trouble meeting an expectation, we ought to be figuring out what's getting in their way so we can help them instead of just lowering the boom.
Sure, definitely. So how do we prepare our kids then for going into the classroom with those teachers or the coaches? Do we talk to them about that? We
may have to advocate for them on, just getting texts here that are coming in on my screen.
Sorry.
Never ending. I'm sorry. My son had a hockey coach when he was about 7, who, after one particular hockey game early in the season, my son and I were walking to the car, and my 7-year-old son said, "Dad, what does pathetic mean?" And I said, "Why, who'd you hear that from?" He said, "Coach told me that one of my plays in the corner was pathetic." Coach got an email from Jacob Greene's dad saying that that was a vocabulary I wasn't real enthusiastic about having my son learn anytime soon, and that wasn't the way I wanted my son to be treated.
Sure.
So oftentimes you got to be an advocate for your kid. Now, do I think it was terrible that quite frankly, my son's lesson that he learned is that adults sometimes lose their minds and that adults sometimes behave badly. That's a good lesson for a kid to learn.
Sure.
But if you've got a caregiver who's dealing with your kid in ways that you think are harmful, for me, the life lesson of that is learned fairly quickly. And then we got to start advocating for our kid to make sure that our kid is not on the receiving end of treatment that is completely incongruent with how we expect our kid to be treated.
Sure. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I've been through that. I have one of my kids is not considered more challenging. And so I've been through that with coaches and teachers and principals. And yeah, no, it's often tricky how to, you want to talk with your child and advocate for them. But at some point, there's some people who are unwilling to change. They're certain that what they're doing is correct. So.
Well,
Yeah.
And that's where, and I run into that constantly, less with my own two, although I was happy to be an advocate for them. They ended up being pretty darn good advocates for themselves.
Nice.
But especially in the kids that I work with, if I've got a teacher or a parent who is behaving in a way that I think is counterproductive, that's usually just a matter of providing them with information that they might be lacking about who this kid is, why the kid is having difficulty meeting certain expectations, why what they've been doing so far has not been helpful to the kid, and what they might be able to do differently that would be more helpful. And, I don't think anybody gets into the parenting business or the teaching business to do harm.
Hopefully
it's
not.
just that some people have a little bit of trouble getting out of their own way because their toolbox isn't as big as we'd like it to be.
Sure. Yeah, no, definitely. I think, as a parent, I think often you bring down however you were parented. So yeah, trying to, figure out that maybe that wasn't necessarily the best. And then you have a chance to, approach it in your own way.
And that can break a few different ways. There are people who were abused as kids.
Sure.
And are still really tough with their own kids, but think it's a lot better than the way they were treated. And that might be true, but they're still not all the way there yet. But there's also people who've been treated in a very harsh way by their own parents who are a little bit too passive with their own kids because they are so allergic to the way they themselves were parented. You never know how that's going to break. Bottom line is there's absolutely no downside, zero, only upside to figuring out what expectations your kid is having difficulty meeting, solving those problems collaboratively and proactively, and doing it together. There is not a single downside to that. There's a lot of downsides to using power as the primary ingredient of your parenting or disciplinary strategies.
Sure, no, definitely. And so then how do you address, I think one of the most standard ways for dealing with younger children, at least, is some sort of a timeout or putting them in their room or something. What do you recommend that people do instead of that?
Same thing. Same thing. It's going to be slightly modified for a kid who's younger than 2. But we're saying proactively, it's hard for you to share your toys with your sister. Let's think about what we can do to make sure that you and your sister are sharing your toys okay.
Yeah.
And if the kid can't verbalize solutions, you're saying, how about, tell me if this is okay, we put your toys over there and her toys over there, and that's how we'll make sure we know whose toy is whose toy. People do this kind of stuff with people walk toddlers through potential solutions all the time.
Sure.
Even if they're not verbal enough to participate in the process fully, you never know what a 1.5-year-old's picking up on.
Sure.
We know they understand a lot more than they can say they understand way earlier than we think they can. So you want to be collaborative from the word go. Here's the interesting thing. People, when it's an infant who's having trouble meeting expectations, people bend over backwards, generally speaking, to try to figure out what's the matter and try to come up with a solution that's going to work. Why we stop doing that at 1.5 or 2 years old, I have no idea. Right at the point where the kid could actually be a participant in solving the problems,
right.
And it's just over to power. I don't get it.
Yeah, I love that. I've never thought about it put that way before. That's a great point. Definitely. So if we could only continue along on that pathway.
Just keep it going. The kid will be happy to participate if you let him.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, and I always like to ask, if you're talking to parents of younger children and you're giving them one thing to kind of focus on, what would that be in your opinion? What's the biggest piece of advice?
Listen.
Okay, I love that.
Even if your kid is not able to use words yet, your kid is communicating with you the minute your kid pops into this world. Listen and try to be responsive to the hand you've been dealt.
Oh, I love that. That's wonderful. So, I learned a lot from you today. I love that we're talking about being proactive and coming alongside our child and letting them know that we care. And if we get to the moment where they're losing their minds, then we haven't done our job with the problem solving yet. So
just defuse it, and if it was a surprise, figure out what you missed. You're not going to be missing much if you make your list.
Yeah, no, I would love to pass that on to parents, that you're not encouraging that behavior by diffusing it and then coming back to it later, because you're going to address it at some point. You're going to figure it out. You're not just letting it go. I think that's the biggest concern, it's that you're not just doing something about that right now. It's like, no, it's not the moment.
The thing is, right now might not be the best time to do something about it.
Yeah.
Right now might not be your best teachable moment.
Right.
That's why we want to do this stuff proactively.
Yeah.
Theoretically, according to certain ways of thinking, you need to make sure that the consequence of a kid's behavior is as closely linked to the behavior itself as it can possibly be.
Sure.
Got many people to think that the minute they see a misbehavior, they got to consequence that behavior immediately so the message gets through. Here's the good news. Message got through a long time ago. You don't have to be in such a big rush. Make your list, do it proactively, and you won't find yourself in the heat of the moment very often anyhow.
Yeah, I love that. That's a blessing to parents, right? Because who wants to be in those situations? Nobody. I know I don't. Definitely. So what's the best way for people if they want to learn some more about how to do this, how to create these relationships and be collaborative?
There's books obviously, but there's all kinds of free resources, and I mean a boatload of free resources on the Lives in the Balance website. Nothing on the website costs any money, and people are often stunned at how much there is on that website for people to learn more about this model. Not only is there streaming video and audio programming, there's Facebook groups for parents. There's a listening library that would take people 6 months to get through. All kinds of stuff to help people do this model well, and it's not going to cost them a nickel.
Yeah, no, I love it. I've been on there, and it's almost like getting free counseling in some ways. I mean, we've been through a lot with one of my own kids, and the information you have on there is outstanding. It's very helpful. So
I hope people will take full advantage of it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know you're very busy. We can hear your phone ringing and everything, so you're very popular. So I really appreciate it, and I hope that people will take advantage of being able to use all your resources and help their kids out, so we can make a better world out there with parents and teachers and coaches, and help our kids out ultimately. So
thank you for doing what you're doing in the struggle, and thanks for having me on.
All right, thank you.
Take care.